If you feel like using textures in your digital art is difficult and you don't really know where to start or how to make it look good, then this is the right video for you. Today I'm going to show you the process of making a texture and using it in your digital art step by step, so that once you reach the end of this video, you can confidently bring out your art supplies and create your own textures exactly the way you want them. My name is Alex, I'm a professional artist and art director working in game development for the past 10 years. Thank you for joining me today. I'll be walking you through 3 steps. First, how you can create a physical texture on paper using any of your art supplies. Then I'll show you how to transfer your texture to the digital space and create a so-called tiling texture. And finally, I'll show you a few different ways you can use that texture in your digital art. I will be working in Photoshop today, but other advanced painting software should allow you to do more or less the same thing. And now, let's get into it. So the first thing we need to do is to create a texture. I will be creating a texture with watercolors, and you can either follow along and do exactly what I do, or you can use any other art supply that you want, like charcoal, colored pencils, ink, crayons, or acrylics. Anything goes. So grab a sheet of paper that works well with the art supply of your choice. I'm using hot pressed watercolor paper, and I will also be using a water brush and super granulation watercolors. These colors are basically just watercolors, but they create this really cool grainy pattern, and some of the colors even have these interesting shifts in hue. In other words, they create fantastic textures. As you make your texture, keep in mind that every choice you make will impact the look of the final texture. Take a look at the difference between these two. This one was painted with a large regular watercolor brush with wet on wet technique. The result is soft and smooth. This one was made with a water brush on dry paper, and it creates a much rougher, messier look. So go ahead and experiment. Make several different textures. Use different tools, colors, and types of paper. Pretty much everything you do here will have an impact. Once your texture is done and dry, it's time to digitize it. And this begins with scanning. You can take a picture of your texture if you don't have a scanner, but I don't recommend it. The lights and shadows in the photo will make it difficult for you to work with the texture in the next step. I generally scan my textures at 600 dpi. You can go bigger or smaller, but for me, 600 dpi is a good balance between good resolution and file size. The higher the resolution, the bigger the file size, and depending on your computer, a super large file might be laggy to work with. Once you have your texture scanned, go ahead and open it in Photoshop or whatever painting software you're using. The next step is to turn this scanned texture into a tiling texture that can seamlessly repeat over large areas in your artwork. This is especially handy if you scan at a lower resolution but you're working on a digital painting of a bigger size. First off, let's cover the basics. So what is a tiling texture? A tiling texture is a texture that repeats seamlessly. This means that when you duplicate your texture and put the new one next to the old one, you can see that there is no seam between them. They look like they could be the same image. The easiest way to create a tiling texture in Photoshop is to use their pattern preview function. Go to View and Pattern Preview. Now you can see that Photoshop is tiling our texture for us, and it does not look very good. It very obviously is not tiling. We can see the edges of the paper, and it very much looks like a number of copies next to each other. On the bright side, with Pattern Preview, this is really easy to fix. So the first thing that I want to do is to crop off these edges. Just hit C on your keyboard and trim the edges. And now if we turn the pattern preview back on, you can see that the white edges are gone, but the seams are still very obvious. To fix this, we're going to be using the clone stamp. The clone stamp is essentially a brush that copies one part of the painting and paints it somewhere else. For the best result, I recommend using the default soft airbrush or some other brush with soft edges. Just to be sure that I don't ruin the original, I'm going to copy it. And I will be working on the new layer. So with the layer selected and the clone stamp tool, hold Alt on your keyboard and press somewhere on the painting. This is my target where I'm going to copy. So I want to copy, say, this area. I click, and when I move my brush, you can see that that area is now following. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to paint. And you can see now that it copies that area and transfers it down here. So all you need to do now is essentially to repeat this process of copying and pasting until we can no longer see the seams. So let's go ahead and do that. So now if I zoom in and hide these frames, you can see that it's no longer possible to see where the texture ends and repeats. So we have created a tiling texture, and if I turn pattern preview off, you can see the difference from the original and the new tiling texture. And that's really the whole process of creating a tiling texture. It is really easy. And now it's time for the moment we've been waiting for. Let's see how this texture looks in our artwork and how we can use it. This is a double spread from the comic project that I'm currently working on, and I just thought I'd use it for this demonstration because in this project I'm using textures quite heavily to achieve this look. And one way I use textures here is to simply clip them to a shape and directly use those beautiful traditional colors. No tricks, no digital magic, just straight up direct use. Let me show you. So these trees are all a flat color on a single layer. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna drag and drop from Explorer the texture into the scene. And what I'm gonna do next is I'm simply gonna clip this texture to the shape of the trees by holding Alt on the keyboard and clicking. And of course, this isn't necessarily the color I would choose for the scene, but as you can see, the texture is there and I could just let it shine through as I've done for different parts of the painting. So that's one way to use textures. Another thing I can do is to just take this other texture that I made here, and this one is made with colored pencils. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clip it to the shape of the trees just as before, and then I can play around with different layer modes. For example, if I put it on multiply, you can achieve this kind of effect. And of course, you can always tweak the opacity here if you want to see less or more of the texture. And there's all these different kinds of layer modes, and you can just browse through them and see maybe you find something that looks really cool. In general, I often prefer to use multiply or overlay. Other ways you can use textures is to not use it across the entire object, but just in a few highlighted areas. So I'm going to set this to multiply again. I'm going to select the texture layer and apply a mask. Now, the mask is white and that means that everything is visible, but if I press Ctrl-I or invert, it's black. So if I zoom in, nothing of the texture is visible. And what I can do here is, with the mask selected, I can take a brush, and it can be a textured brush or it can be a soft airbrush or anything you want. And then you can start going in, and now I'm going to select the white color here to paint on the black mask, and I can go in and I can paint certain areas where I want the texture to shine through. And this can create a really cool effect when you don't want something to be extremely busy, but you just want to have a little bit of detail here and there, or maybe a lot of texture in the front and very little texture in the back. There's of course a million more things you can do, and you can be really creative using textures and brushes and different combinations. But this is a really good basic place to start, and it can get you a really long way from just using flat colors if that's not the style you want to work in. I hope this tutorial was helpful in getting you started using textures in your digital art. If you have any questions, thoughts, or other tutorials you'd like to see, let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, have fun creating, and I'll see you in the next one.